All right, so we'll continue on to our second lecture, which kind of revolve around literature survey. This one of the earliest lecture I want you to be aware of, because going into this class, this is basically would be one of the major things you have to do for your reviews as well as your projects. So when I talk about literature review, what do I mean by that? Right? To break this word down, the first thing that I have to talk about is what do I mean by literature, right? So literature can come from textbook, for example. It's one of the earliest form of literature that you will come through. Uh, the undergrad years, you've been reading textbook. When you're taking the class. Uh, you might be reading textbook when you're taking our class here at TGGS. Another set of literature, which is more relevant to the, I guess, master and PhD degree, is research articles like journal, conference proceedings, and things like archive. Quick note is that with archive, it's not peer review. So when you read through that, you need to actually study the methodology of the paper really clearly to make sure you are aware of what they're trying to claim. Things like dissertation is also a part of the what I would bundle into this literature as well. Things like white paper. Basically, what it govern around this concept is credible material that provide knowledge for you, right? And why do I care? Or I guess what in the purpose of this class, why do we care? The importance of literature is to gain more knowledge of a research topic, right? Um, you are here because you're interested in certain area in ECE. Right now, you might know the background somewhat, right, from your undergraduate degree. But when you go through literature, you will start from where you left off in the undergrad degree, and you get more in-depth knowledge of the cause of the problem in the basically for the problem that are related to hopefully your master thesis. Uh, you gain perspective on related solution to your research problems and the analysis or discussion actually that would kind of lead to the current solution and would lead to future research problems. So these are several key things from reading more and more papers. You also want to identify what can you contribute, right? Not just learning, but you also want to identify are there anything that's still failing based on the current literature, like anything we can engineer, everything we can contribute, everything anything that's novel based on the knowledge you gained so far. Things like what are the downside of each of the solution. So these are typically a good first step for your research because it gives you the background knowledge and it gives you the idea of what else can you do to improve the paper, right? Or to improve the idea further. If you're still not convinced, why do you want to read more papers? It helps when you're stuck on your projects, right? Because if you're in working in a good research problem, there's no clear solution. You will have hypothesis. You have a way to prove your hypothesis, but sometimes the methodology behind like proving that hypothesis can be tedious. Sometimes it's not clear. Is it a good thing to do? Sometimes it can reading related paper can give you some more clues on what else can you do? What are the solutions you can do, right, to uncover the source of the problem beyond the context of the class you've taken so far. It helps you decide what you want to work on. If you're still not convinced, well, I'll force you to do it in this class because it is basically it's one of the core things that you have to do in any graduate level education, including once you're in the job market, you have to keep reading, right? So let's first talk about literature review in more detail, right? When you want to review an article, right, what do you want to have in there? Obviously, you need to be able to summarize the articles, right? Hopefully by your own wording, because it basically means that you actually understand the articles. The advantages, these are typically clearly written in the paper. What else? You also want to see the disadvantages of the paper or the technique presented in the paper. These are keys because you're not going to find it directly from the paper, but you can, once you gather enough background material, you see how not every single paper are perfect. There are always things that you can improve upon, right? The key here behind this step is when you review an article, don't just summarize it. Think. You need to think of why certain thing makes sense, why certain thing doesn't make sense. That's really, really critical, right? You need to be able to tell why does the author do certain things, what are they trying to prove, what are they trying to present the data for, what else can you do as a researcher to improve on the idea. And you also need to be able to read topics that cover multiple articles. This is one of the key thing that I figure. I guess I read your response to the seminar, at least for the ones that I organized, right, from last semester. And one common theme I found is like, whenever you are going across any terrain that you're not familiar with, so you're like, oh, okay, I'm not familiar with this, I don't really understand it. Well, if you're in the EC program, right, at least try to make sure you open yourself up to more area, right? You need, why is that the case? Why is that so important? Because you need to be able to connect multiple things together. What problems do they solve? Why should anyone care about this problem? And ask this question many, many times. Like, why should you care about this problem? What are the specific advantages of each paper that they bring? Let's say you read multiple articles that cover one single topic, right? You see different angles into how to solve this problem. You need to understand fundamentally what are the difference, what are the common things, and what can still be done. What are the drawbacks? And good papers, when you pick the paper wisely, right, it would help develop these stories for you. One of the great thing that I would like when you go read top venues, paper from top venues, right, you see that you can understand the problem more clearly, and the way that they're presented to you is really, really, I guess, to the point, but it's also be able to convey how important the problem and solution are. So my recommendation is when you keep reading this paper, if there's any paper that you like, keep that as a good reference on how to present the idea, right? You need to connect how ideas are related. When you read multiple papers that work on a set of topics or area that are closely connected to each other. And with that in mind, literature review is not one-step process. There's multiple iteration of literature review. So you basically, this is what happened. You begin with a research topic, right? And then what do you do? I'm gonna go search for related literature. I'll expand on the word papers a little bit. It can be papers, it can be dissertation, it could be just textbook, right? It can even be like a credible material that you might have found online, but be aware, make sure it's credible, right? Just don't randomly Google, because not everything is credible. But once you gather all this knowledge, you would then update your own references, you read them and think and summarize, right? Summarize and think is one of the most critical steps for literature review. What does the paper you just spend a lot of time reading, that what does it contribute to your own knowledge? Don't think that, hey, I read paper is a waste of my time. When you pick a paper, make sure the paper you're reading, first of all, doesn't waste your time, because at the end of the day, you're learning something. Make sure whatever you're learning or whatever time you spend on, like 4 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours reading that one paper, you want to get something out of that. So you need to summarize and think. Once you do that step, you have a clear path into, okay, maybe I need to search for a more related paper, or if the research topic is not really the direction you really, really want to pursue, you would then look for another topics that can come as a result of reading more and more papers, right? The topic and interest will be guided by the review you're doing. So because your problems, it's going to be guided by what you experience through, to be honest, like reading this paper, reading textbook, reading or learning through lectures. It's actually pretty critical to be able to select what to read. Why is it the case? You have limited time. No one invented time machine yet. No one invented pills that would make you live forever. You have limited amount of time. So you need to be able to decide whether the paper you're about to read is relevant to your work or not, right? Anything that might be relevant can lead to a new solution. And to be honest, a good researcher, right, would try to cover all possible major relevant works first because they want to make sure that the idea they're trying to propose, first of all, makes sense. Second of all, I know all the background material that leads to where the problem is right now. So you need to decide if the paper is good or not. You don't want to read papers that have low novelty or no novelty. You don't want to read papers that are poorly written. It's just a waste of time to try to understand what they're trying to do. You want to make sure the design is really, really good. Methodology is good. Paper, there's actually quite a lot of paper that has methodology that doesn't make sense. Personally, because I review multiple paper submission through things like IEEE transaction, ACM transaction, as well as I've been like in a program committee for top tier conferences in the world, and I read multiple papers that I have to review. And if you come across bad papers, these are common mistakes, right? Poorly designed methodology, low novelty. Like this paper doesn't contribute anything beyond the obvious. Even things like wrong methodology or misleading results, right? These can be really, really detrimental to your learning because you pick bad papers. You want to make sure you use your time and prune your choices, right? How do you pick a relevant paper? Sorry about this highlight. So you want to first read the title, read the abstract for sure, right? If you're still unsure about that, it's better to just read the paper and you get from it. It's like, okay, do I learn something new? Does it conflict with something else? So one of the primary thing that kind of make a difference between good and bad and horrible researcher is if the work you are doing doesn't go along with findings from previous works, especially the high impact previous works, there's definitely something that might be going on with your own methodology, right? So if you read papers that have results that doesn't really comply to many other common findings, you might want to basically question that, hey, can I trust the paper? Because sometimes the methodology can be really, really bad to the point that leads to wrong conclusion, right? And another thing is irrelevant but good papers is always worth a read, right? It can lead to really good ideas. You can even get to the point where you can apply similar ideas on your work, which actually can work pretty well, right? Some designs that work in one area might work well in others because it's been thought through, right? As long as the problem fundamentally are similar, the solution fundamentally provide, right, the method to solve whatever you're trying to search for. That's actually can help, right, with your own projects. I mean, why not? Again, make sure you pick relevant papers. You want to first of all check with your advisor, check with many of the top labs in the world, right? I mean, the information are available, so you should know who are the major players beyond just professor in Aachen, beyond just professor in Germany. Look at professors in the world and see what have they done, right? And to pick, like to kind of focus a little bit more on how to pick a good paper, right? The thing is, how can you tell if the paper has high impact, right? You can look at, for example, publication venues. As long, let's say you look at top venues that are basically the best of your area, right? These are going to be reviewed by the expert in the area, right? And I can tell you through my experience being reviewers and program chairs of these venues, it's actually pretty intense. there's a long discussion whether the paper is worthy of publication or not, and some small mistakes that can have impact on the idea, the novelty would get rejected, right? So when you look at top venues, right, you can probably trust the reviewer to some extent because they are all expert, right? The way they think, the way we think about like, okay, should we accept the paper or not, is essentially, if this paper get published, do I learn something new? Is it interesting? Or what's the contribution for the paper to the world? And if they get published, it means that all these reviewers agree that, hey, this is an awesome idea. It contributes something interesting to the current human knowledge. So publication venue is definitely important. Another thing that can convey to some extent, right, are things like citation counts. But please make note of that, that the number of citation can vary between areas and areas, right? Now, I'll give you one example. Because there's way more work in, say, machine learning compared to computer systems. So papers in machine learning is typically get cited way more often than computer systems. There's way more papers in medical areas from across abroad. There can be like a paper on just one case study, right? So paper in the area of medical research can have kind of like inflated citation number compared to another area that that the community is smaller, but maybe it's actually as equally important. So citation number is a good way to gauge, like, should I check this paper out or not? But it's not the whole story. You want to look at the venue, you want to look at the abstract. You want to look at the abstract and understand, hey, does the abstract kind of tell you something interesting or not, right? So why are these tips are good as the first thing to read? First of all, it's likely credible, right? And it provide a major contribution to I guess human knowledge, especially when they get published as top venue, right? So if you want to identify top venues, I have slides in a few more slides. I'll talk about that. Definitely check with your advisor. If you work in computer science, definitely feel free to check with me and the other professor in the computer engineering area. We kind of like can identify those for you. If you work in CSE or if you work in EPE, definitely check with the professor that belongs to those departments. They will know, right? It does provide major contribution. And the design that they propose typically have fewer downsides, and it contains a good amount of analysis. So one thing that I would definitely recommend is when you read this paper, there's the idea part that you need to learn. There's also the methodology part. How did they prove their idea? What have they done to prove their idea that is true? What data did they gather? What data are important to prove certain things? So these are something that you need to train in order to actually know what experiment you have to do to provide the correct analysis for your idea. And hopefully paper at top venues, right? They make sure that it's easier to read, it's well written, and typically they are actually easier to read than poorly written paper. So these are to be honest, my tips, right, on picking a good paper. What else do I have in terms of tips? Like you want to be able to maintain the bibliography. If you use LaTeX, which I do recommend, right? There's a bib file that you can put in there. You can create reference really easily with LaTeX. You can use this software called Mendeley, or if you use Microsoft Word, you can use EndNote. And I do encourage everyone to use LaTeX. For the purpose of this class, because we are engineers, I really want to make sure we all can use LaTeX. So I'm going to stress on the word enforce, every single one of you to use LaTeX for your project report. Right, so everyone has to use LaTeX. Again, repeat, because the last year when I'm teaching this class, some students got confused and didn't know they have to use LaTeX. I want to enforce that everyone has to use LaTeX for their project report. So what are the different tools now that hopefully you buy the concept of picking good papers can help with your career as a master student, or I mean, to be honest, as a people, I guess, engineer that want to keep learning and learning, right? So the tools to help your literature survey is important, because finding what to read can be tough, right? Especially now that you're all new to research. Finding the first few papers to read can be confusing because you're just being thrown into this ocean of papers. So finding what to read next also can be confusing, because now that you read your first paper, so many references, so many things that maybe seems interesting, or so many things that seems confusing. So where do I go next? The first thing I would recommend is be aware of the citation that the paper you first originally puts in, especially the background section, because that would provide you the backward reference. Every paper has its own reference section, and the assumption is the author of the paper doing this, like they're citing the relevant papers. So the reference section can be useful for basically trying to dig deeper into certain topics, finding works that tackle the same problem. What are the downsides of just looking at the reference section? Reference section only go backward in time. It doesn't go forward in time because the author cannot predict the future. So it only go backward in time. So how do you go forward in time? Google, to be honest, is really powerful, right? The downside of Google is you need to know the keyword to search. So what do you do? First of all, you have your advisor for a reason. Check with them. We also need to make sure if the paper is credible or not. So check the venues. If the peer review and if the venue are good, it should be a good read, right? I mean, it doesn't hurt to read more knowledge. It doesn't hurt at all. And now that I mentioned that you want to go forward in time, there's one tool that actually is perfect for that called Google Scholar. So if you haven't checked it out yet, feel free to check out. It provides you a tool to search for paper. I would rank this tool as a secondary to your advisor. Your advisor should be a really main contact person for like a great paper for you to read. Google Scholar can tell you, for example, how many times the paper is cited. This can be used to imply the impact of the paper. Stress on the word imply, right? It's only imply. It has both forward and backward pointers, so you can go forward in time for citation. It can go to like, okay, what papers in the future that cite this paper, so you know all relevant papers. It also allows you to search the other works by the same authors. Why is that important? If you are in academia or if you're a researcher in the industry, we typically have our own area of expertise. So we don't just finish with one work and call that's all, right? So the same researcher typically have multiple works on the same area. So that can be a really, really helpful tool for you to actually dive through different things, right? So let's go through some actual example here. I'm gonna open up Google Chrome, right? And let me search Google. First of all, go to Google Scholar on Google here, right? So there are multiple things you can do, right, on Google Scholar. For example, let's say I'm a hardware guy, right? There's a new device that come in that can use as main memory. So let's say I want to search for RAM. This is like a new device that has been out for a while in the area of material science. So you can see that there's quite a lot of paper from the material science side, right? But I'm not, I don't care too much about their properties. I want to see how can I use it, right? So I can say, hey, can I use RAM for machine learning? To be precise, let me do CNN, right? This is one of the machine learning application that people use a lot nowadays. Now you can see that, hey, it's actually start to match multiple papers that have these keywords. You can see that how many times the paper gets cited, how many times does the paper get, what are the other? So you can see that, hey, there's quite a mix of the common names in here, right? So you can see that, hey, where's the venue? So let's go to this paper, right? You see that this paper will it will show you the actual location of the paper, and you see that here it's published in DAC. DAC is one of the top tier conference in computer science. Conference is way better than journal. So this is where the best work are getting published. So you see that, hey, the paper is here. You can get a PDF of the paper, right? You can also search for the author. So let's say I just search my name here. You can go and see, okay, that's my page. It will include the works that I've done across over time. You can get it ranked based on the year of publication, for example. So you can see, okay, what's my related, I guess my recently published work. These would give you the link to the paper's actual information page that would include things like abstract, right? You can go back in time and see, okay, if you want to look into things like, okay, how do I do the technique called processing in memory. There's also another information here with the PDF, right? So if somehow Google found the PDF, it's going to be linked right here. So it's really, really easy to go through this, right? So that's one actual example of how to use Google Scholars. You can also use Google in many times if you want to search for papers, add the word paper or publication at the end. It would kind of search primarily focusing on papers. And how to check if the paper get published to top tier venues. So this is one of the really, really interesting topic that me alone is not enough to tell, because I only know the top tier venues within computer related areas like computer science, computer engineering, a little bit of computer, no, actually computer networks. And so if you look at top tier venues, right? What I want you to get across from this is you want to make sure you start from there, because these are typically great papers that make a lot more impact. They are reviewed by world expert, right? So let me give you an example of the one of the top, right, micro architecture conference. Basically, this is the area that I'm working on. This is the top conference in the world on like designing computer, basically computer, your CPU, your GPU, basically anything that has to do with computer architecture. And you can go to the program committee, you realize that they are actually from top places, right? Things like companies like Microsoft, NVIDIA, that like university like MIT, Berkeley, NUS. Basically, this is like everywhere in the world. You see CMU, you see ARM, which is a company that produce a lot of chip design for many companies, including Apple's. You see ETH Zurich, you see Facebook, you see U Toronto, you see U Michigan. Basically, you see expert, right? Expert from everywhere in the world, not just the US, not just Europe, literally everywhere in the world. So these are much less likely to be wrong or misleading, to be honest. I'm not going to say it's great, right? Because I've seen papers that published at the top venues, and at some point it gets less relevant depending on the problem, depending on the mechanism, but they're much less likely to be wrong or misleading. Most papers published there are, like, I was in this committee as well, right? So one of the primary things that the paper would get rejected is they don't have enough novelty. They don't have enough contribution. So anything that get published there has been reviewed by experts, and we all agree that, hey, this paper actually have novelty, it's exciting. So let's publish them, right? So a lot of these papers are so well written because the group, the research group that published paper to these venues, they all care about their own work, so they want to make sure the writing is meticulously done, it's close to perfect as best as possible. So hopefully you spend less time. So that's you can spend less time reading the paper and more time gaining your knowledge, right? So it's a really cost efficient way to spend your time. Many frontier papers would cite them as well. So you can go to Google Scholar and to go to SciPy to go forward in time, right? So now is the key here. How do I identify top tier venues? For EPEs, look for IEEE transactions, like something like transaction on power electronics, transaction on power systems, transaction on smart grid. You can go a bit more crazy. I'm sure that there are more like a traditional non-IEEE journal as well. But definitely check with EP professor for these because I don't know enough about the area, right? For CSE students, there's definitely journal like such as IEEE transaction or signal processing. As also conference, because for CSE that also include computer network. So if you look into computer network, as SIGCOMM, which is a top conference, NSDI top conference as well, Mobicom, Mobisys top conference for mobile. There's also multiple IoT outlets from the conference point of view. So these are for the CSE students. For the computer related field like computer engineering, definitely check conference. That's like the best of the best, where the best of the best work go to. Journal is considered second tier. The first tier is there's like top CS conference. There are one of the good resources called CS ranking over here. I'm showing you the screen. The reason why I point this out is the nice thing about this is it's sorted by the area. It's sorted by the area. So you can go to say AI, right? It would show you, hey, these are the 2 conferences that are top in AI. These are the 3 conferences top in machine learning. These are the top conference for NLP, natural language processing. These are top conference for architecture, right? And you can also go based on university as well. And the nice thing about that, let's say you expand CMU, which is right now at the top, right? You can look at different professor and look at their field, like NLP over here, vision over here, right? So you see that multiple people are here and they have the link to not just the field, but the Google Scholar page, right? So if you look at this, right, one thing you can try is, okay, I want to look into let's do architecture, basically the field I'm in, right? And let's just look at the world. Basically now you're gonna see people who work on this area that are from everywhere in the world, right? You can see, hey, let's go to Michigan, right? And let's check out, say, Tom Venage page on Google Scholar, right? He's one of the top architects in Michigan, basically in the world. You see that, hey, his topic has a lot to do with, for example, right, things like power control and server system, right? And you can see the papers that he published, the year. So if you want to see, okay, what's the most recent works from Tom Venage, you can say, okay, and now is the tip a little bit is now going into how to manage the system a little bit. It's going through how to look into heterogeneity, right? CPU and GPU as well, right? So you can see these things from CS ranking, which is kind of nice actually, because you don't get tied to just big area like electrical engineering, but now you can go into sub area and you know each lab. You can actually go through each lab. So these are pretty neat to check out the labs that work on different area. All right, so put back, right? So this is basically how to identify top tier venues. I will organize, basically, I would ask the CSE professors as well as the EP professors to organize their own version of the non-computer related field. Today, I'll kind of dive deeper into computer engineering. For those of you who are not in computer engineering, feel free to fast forward because there'll be a separate video link for the EP and CSE students. All right, so for computer engineering, I already talked about CS ranking. These are top tier venue for all the work in computer engineering and computer science. And this includes things like embedded system, mobile network, or SysCom and NSDI, right? Architecture. And I'll tell you why did I highlight this with a different color. Database like Sigmod, VLDB, ICTE, and POTS, right? OS like SOSP and OSDI, triple AI, ML and data mining, NLP, right? Computer vision, and things like hardware design, like design automation, like how to do measurement in computer science, right? So these are different really handy tools that you can kind of like dive into each area. And another fun fact, right? So if you look at TGGS, right, in our ECE, sorry about the ESSC, there was the old name for the department. We changed to ECE now. So in the ECE program, right, the contribution from CS ranking as of today, the thing in blue are the papers and venue I published. The things in yellow is the venue that Dr. Yosavalai has published at. And the thing in red are the venue where Dr. Sansari has published at. Fun fact, he was working on hardware design before he shifted to machine learning and software system. So you can basically check with us. Feel free to check with us. We are going to be more than happy to guide you through the literature survey for sure, right? Another good place that you can search is called ResearchGate. Some of you might be aware of this. It's kind of similar to Google Scholar, but provide more like a platform for discussion. I don't think there's a lot of discussion going on for the engineering field. I don't see that a lot. I would see this on more of the hacker news or Reddit, but it's still a good platform. I generally almost always use Google Scholars because it's easier, it's faster actually. And to be honest, in ResearchGate, the way they like rank things is like they still have no idea how CS conference work. So some of the work it's hard to kind of browse through, right? And another good source is arXiv, right? Many papers are licensed under certain publisher like IEEE, ACM, Usenet, Elsevier. So researchers can also use arXiv to host a version that allow people to download the paper, right? Many of the math papers, for example, take so much time to review. This is also true. Like if I have some ongoing work that are being submitted right now, I can put a copy of that to arXiv to make sure that someone else can check out the work, right? In the field of maths, right? The review process typically take a lot longer, so reader can do the proof of the math behind on their own in the paper, right? So a lot of maths people would put their manuscript on arXiv. There's also bioRxiv for biology paper as well. What else, right? I mean, now it's like almost a wrap for this session. What else are my tips, right? So the first tip is you want to be able to know the major players in the area, right? For example, I work in architecture, right? So I would know that, well, I definitely have to check paper from Michigan, UT Austin, CMU, UIUC, Berkeley, Stanford, Zurich, EPFL, right? These are samples of major players in the area. Better yet, if you know the major players, as in the professor's name itself, you can go to their lab, right? Because in each area, there's going to be a selected group of researchers in the world who work actively on this. The good way to do that is talk to your advisor, and then feel free to fact check us, because some of us are still, when most of us read tons of papers, but because of the work, amount of work we have to do, right? We don't always catch up to the most recent papers. So feel free to talk to the advisor and fact check, right? Have a research discussion, right? Every single discussion should have proper science backing it up. So this is like a really good thing to do, right? It's a positive thing actually from both our side and your side. And start from high impact work. Check what group it comes from, because you can then go to that group's publication and see what else has it worked on. It gives you more idea. And check out paper from major labs. Quick note for folks who go to DAD, like, don't just start with professors at Argonne. just because they are your potential advisor, right? Start with the top labs from say MIT, CMU, UIUC, Stanford, Berkeley, Zurich. Like basically start from the top labs because they're gonna be at the forefront of knowledge. Then it will give you a lot more background that you can cover. And that's actually going to give you a really, really good starting steps into working with Professor Arkin, working with us, right? And always seek out new technology because even when they're not in your area, they might be enabling new and exciting things. Keep reading interesting stuff. I mean, to be honest, right? For example, right? Who would, I mean, actually, to be honest, like I was forced to know this a little bit more because there's some work involved in this area, right? That if you know DNA sequencing, you can then build the hardware to help critical patient, right? It requires a lot of computer science going into it. You can do personalized medicine based on your DNA, right? So these can be exciting new area. Actually, it's a pretty old area, but it can be a pretty exciting topics to learn. And don't just apply old technology because technology moves really, really, really fast. Although you have to always look ahead and be fundamental, right? Be fundamental. For example, if you're CSE student, just don't stop looking at just 5G. It's already done. Most communication labs in the world are already working for whatever is going to come through the next generation or method to further optimize and take advantage of this much better latency and bandwidth of 5G, right? For EPE students, please, I mean, seriously, learn how to program. It's a must, right? To be honest, if you want to keep improving things. I mean, to be honest, if you don't want to be replaced by another program, you need to learn how to program. You want to be able to utilize new tools. That doesn't mean that classical topics are not important. Definitely way more important. But you want to also be able to deal with new tools that come out, right? Everything is still backed by maths and physics that you learn. And a quick warning, right? All the theoretical knowledge, all the classic knowledge are your building block. These are one of the utmost important because everything we do in engineering, they are all based on science. If you don't know science, there's no way you can be a successful engineer. You need to know the science behind it. So that's a really, 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 really important thing. Right? So another thing I want to talk about is like things that would go into the paper, right? You should be able to write things like background section, right? So when you write a background section, you should be able to explain things like the basic science behind problems you're solving and explain any required background material, right? You want to be able to discuss trade-off. So when you do a literature survey, be aware of what the paper is trying to present you as a background because that's important. That's important, right? And another thing that's important when you do literature survey, especially when you're new into the new research area, is look at related work because it contrasts to the background. The related work, not just the building block for the mechanism of the paper, but it include any major related work, and you don't want to miss any of those. You need to focus on the key differences between the related work and your own work, because otherwise your work has no contribution, so it's useless. So you should be able to summarize the downside of previous work. So don't just summarize previous works. You want the insights into why your work is better, right? And that's it for the session for this video. Before we leave today, I want you to kind of stress out since we're doing this in order, I want to talk more about paper reviews because there'll be 4 paper reviews in total. Starting from the first week of class, I'll make sure I have the announcement next year when the class begins. And you can pick the paper related to your potential thesis topic, and that's actually recommended. And your review should provide a summary of the paper. First of all, you should add, why did you pick this paper? I used to have this criteria where the paper you review has to have certain amount of citations. I get rid of that because sometimes it can be hard to find if you want to go to like really, really narrow area, which I don't know why you want to do that for the first few paper you're reading. But now I'm asking you to basically tell me Why did you pick this paper? Why did you pick this paper? And the reason should be just, it should go beyond, hey, my advisor published this, or the professor at Arkin published it. It should not be just that. It should be why this paper can be related to the area you want to work on. The reason is that, hey, your advisor published it is not good enough, for sure. I'll take points deduction if you do that. You want to be able to discuss pros and cons, and for the cons, go beyond just English is bad. Look at the paper design, look at the mechanism, look at the methodology, and that should be the downside that you identify from. Don't just say things like, I don't understand the paper because the writing is bad, because in many cases, it's not the writing is bad, it's because you don't have the background, right? So make sure you can identify that. I'll make sure I keep that in mind when I'm grading your review as well. Lastly, what else can you do to improve the paper? You can use this paper to review as a part of your class project as well. We'll talk about that next for the class. Well, make sure you never plagiarize. I did apply the penalty already every single semester. I don't want to do it again. It saddens me when I see you plagiarize, right? And I'll make sure you suffer from that. I'll guarantee you're gonna suffer from that if you choose to do it. All right. So don't be sloppy. This is something that I want you to put your heart to some extent on this task. The review doesn't have to be long. The review doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be like a one full like A4 pages. I want to make sure that I understand that you understand the paper and you can identify pros and cons and what else you can do to improve the paper. Make sure you have this, make sure you have this, make sure you have this, make sure you have this. All right. And for the class project, we'll ask you to do a literature survey and tell us why you choose your current research problem. One presentation in the middle for the proposal. You need to be able to convince us that the problem is good. And then at the end of the semester, one more presentation graded by all the lecturers as well. That report will be graded by both your advisor and myself. And you have to have a good background to motivate your potential design. This tentative date is in the final exam week. All our EC lecturers will attend the presentation and Q&A. More information will be posted on Canvas. All right. And for the notes of the class project, because I said literature survey, don't just finish reading the 4 papers and say that's all. Your grade are gonna suffer. I'll make sure that's the case. Literature survey doesn't mean that, hey, I read 4 papers and that's it. You need to convince me that you do a thorough job for your master thesis. This is basically a preparation for your next semester. Your grade is gonna suffer if you don't thoroughly survey at least the most relevant papers. So how many should I read? To be honest, check out the related work section of the paper you like from top venues. That should be a good guideline. All right, so that's it for the current session. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next session on lecture number 3.